Okay, we're gonna go ahead and start again. Hi everyone, thank you so much for being here. My name is Olivia Pascal. I'm a third-year grad worker in the history department. It's wonderful to see everybody here, both the folks here in the room and the folks on Zoom. Thank you to the Jefferson Madison Regional Library for hosting us in this space. We acknowledge that this land, the Piedmont and Blue Ridge Mountain regions of Virginia, including Charlottesville, was taken from its original stewards, the Siouan Indians of the Monacan and Manahoac tribes. One of this library's namesake, without Monacan consent or consultation, excavated and explored one of their historic villages near Monticello. Both of this library's namesakes enslaved people in this town. We say this to center ourselves in these places, institutions, and in their histories. This afternoon, you'll hear from several UVA workers about the university's budget and financial position, and how that impacts our day-to-day lives. I'm going to start out by framing the university's budget in the context of its public mission as the state's flagship university. Then you'll hear from Daryl, who will go through the nuts and bolts of the university's financial position, like where and how it decides to spend its money. Cleo is then going to talk about the Cut the Checks campaign and her experiences of being paid late by the university. We'll have some time for question and answer and a call to action. Whoa. The agenda. UVA's budget is a reflection of the school's priorities. UVA is a public university, and as a public university, the union believes that the state's flagship university should be acting in the public good. UVA believes this too. It's in its mission statement, which you can read. But as we'll learn today and hear from a number of speakers, the university isn't doing everything it can to serve its public mission. Almost a whole year ago, more than 100 graduate workers were paid late at the end of the year. After collectively organizing, we were told by Provost Ian Baucom that this was not going to happen again. But as you've seen already, late payments continue to be a systematic issue, and as many of you have experienced, it has happened again. For a long time, universities have been a site of political action and movement, especially by students and workers. And that's not a tenable situation for people with power, whether it's our administration, the Board of Visitors, Glenn Youngkin, our governor, or Congress. So we get austerity measures, we get management changes and funding cuts, like we've seen in this state with the Higher Ed Restructuring Act of 2005, which took a lot of decision-making power out of the hands of the General Assembly and placed it with a governor-appointed Board of Visitors. That kind of thing results in UVA's governance being even more oriented towards the private sector and the increasing charterization and privatization of higher education in the state. Not quite as acute, but similar to what we're seeing just over the border in West Virginia. But the truth is, UVA can and should act like the public institution that it is. Grad workers, staff, and faculty at UVA are used to hearing that there's just not enough money to go around. The university acts like money is really scarce when it comes to supporting its public missions of research and teaching. These are quotes from a Board of Visitors Finance Committee meeting from over the summer. The Board of Visitors and the administration know that compensation for faculty and staff is below market rates, and that is making it harder to recruit and retain high quality faculty and staff. And we would also add graduate workers. I know staff members here who were working what the university itself calculated to be the equivalent of 2 full-time jobs, and we're making less than $47,000 a year. I'm personally upset that the university congratulated itself on raising grad worker stipends to $30K this summer, which remains $9K below a living wage in Charlottesville, and balanced the budget with no warning or deliberation by nixing extra years of research funding that was critical for grad workers who had their research interrupted by COVID. As the university itself recognizes, and this is a quote from just a few paragraphs down in the same meeting minutes, UVA's financial position is incredibly strong. The austerity measures that staff, faculty, and grad workers live every day are a reflection of the university's priorities and not of its actual financial position. The university isn't just keeping wages below the cost of living for many workers, it's also making it more expensive to work for the university and to live in Charlottesville. UVA's footprint has expanded in this city dramatically. I don't really need to tell you this, we all see the construction. Through the UVA Foundation, which is one of the places that UVA funnels its money, where it's not subject to public oversight like the university itself is. The university owns a ton of properties: Boar's Head, Morven, Foxhaven, Fontaine, and it's currently opposing a 10-story housing development in the Ivy Corridor, where it has also just bought a ton of property. The university doesn't pay property taxes on all of its property either, most notably not on the space that grounds encompasses in Charlottesville. And it has a long history of displacing Black residents in the city, most notably when it built the hospital in the 1980s and demolished a Black neighborhood to do so. UVA Health has a history of being shitty as well, which I won't really go into, but that is a Pulitzer Prize-winning investigation that you can find if you Google. Many of you may have experienced this summer going to the doctor and getting charged $15 randomly just for being sick over the summer. That is a new thing that was instituted, another way that we are being nickeled and dimed. And it goes further. Currently, a friend who makes less than $30K as a grad worker here is receiving debt collection notices for a surgery she got at UVA Health just a few months ago. UVA's mission as a public university is to serve students from all walks of life. But by contributing to the problem of rising living costs in the city, it contradicts that mission. How are we supposed to work, research, and teach well when staff, grad workers, and faculty live 20 minutes out of town in Richmond because rent in Charlottesville is too high? Financial and emotional stresses, commuting time, insecurity caused by high housing costs and low wages make it harder for UVA workers, staff, faculty, grad workers to live in this community. And UVA has the lowest share of freshmen on Pell Grants out of all state flagship universities in the country, despite having the highest endowment per student at almost $600,000 per student. You'll hear more about that later. And I would just ask, is that like what it looks like to be a public university serving the public good? Not all parts of the university are subject to financial squeezes. This is just a recent summary of major capital projects that I pulled from a random Board of Visitors Finance Committee meeting. This committee, by the way, is made up of folks whose expertise is in private for-profit industry, not in public institutions and not in public decision-making. When the university receives donations for capital improvement projects like these, so like Contemplative Commons or the new scoreboard for the football field, these are understood as expansions that benefit everybody and expand the pie for everyone. But to use an example from my experience, when grad workers receive external fellowships or when the university decides to pay us more money per year, the university doesn't expand that pie and says the money has to come from somewhere else. So it takes money away in extra years of funding or by capping our allotted income in our department's case at $39K. If you get external fellowships above that, you have to like give money back to GSAS so they take it away from you. And despite all of these capital improvement projects, the construction of new buildings that we all see, UVA's administration is cutting the bridge program. It's eliminating the 7th year of funding for PhD candidates and consistently undermining its workers by not paying us on time and then telling us that it's not a systemic issue. I'm using a lot of examples about grad worker life because that's what I know, but I bet faculty, staff in this room are also experiencing this in your own ways, that you've also seen colleagues underpaid, offices understaffed, departments denied hires that they needed. We know that these budget decisions are political value statements made by the university. The way this institution decides to spend its money is an expression of what it cares about. I'm going to turn it over to Daryl now, and they're going to tell us in more detail about the university's financial position, where its money goes, and how it's spent.
Cool. Thank you so much, Olivia. That was great. I'm Daryl. I'm a grad worker in the astronomy department. And yeah, I'm just going to jump into an overview of UVA's finances and how that's broken down. Okay, so just to set the stage, UVA is in an extremely strong financial position, and they have the highest possible credit rating, and that's a AAA credit rating. So as Olivia said, they're doing really well. In their own words, credit rating agencies cite UVA's strong enrollment, robust balance sheet, diverse revenue mix, and strong leadership as components of its AAA rating. So they know that they're in a very strong position. Our research team also did our own analysis. So we evaluated UVA's financial health using what's called a Feigenbaum-Bunces scoring system. And this is basically based on 4 key metrics related to the university's debt, cash flow, and net assets. So we scored them on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being very weak and 5 being very strong. And you can see here that from 2018 to 2021, UVA has been sitting right around a score of 4 or 5 on average. So they're doing very well by all metrics, whether you're a credit rating agency or our own research team. And their credit score is really important, or their credit rating is really important because it determines the interest rates that banks give them when they take out loans, which they're doing constantly. So yeah, UVA is in a great position. And part of why they're in such a strong position, as I said, is their diverse stream of revenue. So they have a lot of different streams of revenue, and that allows them to sort of flex their budget on years where there might be an economic downturn. So just to look at 2021, for example, the university's revenue was about 30% or just over a third funded by tuition and fees alone. And then about a quarter of their budget came from grants and contracts. And then just over 10% was state funding, another 10-ish% from gifts, and a similar amount from income. So our state funding is on par with like how much funding we're receiving just from donor gifts. So that is a concern for sure. But nonetheless, UVA is in a great position, and that's no problem for them because they have plenty of money. Okay, so we have a lot of streams of income, a lot of streams of revenue, and UVA is also generating just a massive amount of revenue compared to its expenses. So what I'm showing here in green is the total revenue, and then in purple is the total expenses. So the area between those curves is what they're netting every year. And on average, UVA nets just about $700 million a year. So they're making hundreds of millions of dollars every year. Once they've covered their expenses, that's what they're able to put back into investments and other projects. And also worth noting is that UVA netted over $3 billion during the pandemic between 2020 and 21, which was supposed to be a really hard year, but they did really well. So good for them. And this trend is also aligned with consistent increases in UVA's net financial position over the past almost 2 decades. So you can see here that back in 2005, UVA's wealth sat just under $5 billion. And in 15 years, they've almost tripled their wealth. So now we're sitting at just around $13 billion in net position, which is just where their wealth sits at the end of a financial year. Okay, so also important is UVA's ratio of assets to liabilities. So this is the ratio of what they own versus what they owe in debt. And so the blue bar is the total assets. And you can see that from 2019 to 2022, they sit between 10 to $20 billion of total assets. We compare that to their total debt, which is always under $5 billion. And this is actually an insane ratio for a public university. Again, like the credit rating agencies will take a 2-to-1 ratio as being the strongest possible ratio of assets to liabilities. And that's what gets you that AAA rating. UVA is consistently sitting at a ratio of 5-to-1 or better. So they're like, I mean, they're crushing it in terms of like what they own. And I've also split out one of their assets, which is just the cash and cash equivalents in green. And so that is money that is available within a year for them to spend whenever they need it. And so just in terms of liquid cash, they could pay off all of their debts at any moment if they needed to, which is, again, unheard of for a university of this size. Also, at the end of fiscal year 22, UVA had nearly $10 billion in reserves, which is enough to cover 27 months of operating expenses. So that means that if necessary, UVA could operate for over 2 years without receiving any additional funding or generating any revenue. So just to summarize, UVA holds the strongest possible credit rating, and their revenue consistently outpaces expenses. But the question that we're all wondering, I think, is have students and workers been benefiting from this constantly increasing wealth? Spoiler alert, we're not. But in terms of students, the past 20 years have shown a trend of increasing enrollment. So you can see here, this is the number of students enrolled at UVA since 2002. And we've gone up from under 23,000 to nearly 27,000 students every year. And this suggests that UVA is just going to continue serving more and more students with the years to come, which is a great thing and is usually a contributing metric to a strong financial position because every student that is enrolled is also tuition payment. However, despite its strong enrollment numbers, UVA has continuously increased tuition for students over the past 20 years. So you can see here that state funding in blue has remained more or less the same, while funding from tuition adjusted for full-time enrollment has increased a lot. So as UVA continues to increase tuition, more and more students are going into debt. And as of 2020, 1/3 of UVA undergraduates will graduate in debt. and their average debt is $25,000. So for the average student, that's going to take about 20 years to pay off. So why is that happening when we have strong enrollment? It's a great question for the administration. At the same time, salaries for workers at UVA have remained more or less stagnant, while the salaries for top earners have skyrocketed. So just looking at 2012 to 2019, the median pay for UVA employees increased by under $20,000, while the pay for the highest paid individual increased by over $500,000. And again, as of 2019, President Jim Ryan is paid over 12 times the median salary of the average worker. So not looking great. Yeah. So the bottom line here is that UVA's financial position is very robust, and they have the highest possible credit rating. UVA has seen consistent increases in its revenue over the past 20 years, including a record-breaking $3 billion change in net position during the pandemic. And despite their strong position, UVA students are taking on more and more debt than ever with an increasing cost of attendance, and the administration continues to cite budgetary shortfalls as a reason why they shouldn't increase pay to meet the cost of living and why they shouldn't hire workers where they're desperately needed. So at UVA, money really isn't an issue. The problem lies in how the money is being spent and who is making those decisions. So who's making those decisions? This is a great compilation of the people who are setting our budget at UVA every year. So this is a representation of the Board of Visitors Finance Committee. So these are all government or governor appointed, basically CEOs and private investors. So we have representation on the board from Dominion Energy, from Silver Eagle Beverages, that's a beverage company from Houston, Texas, Centauri Health Solutions, and a number of capital holdings groups and private equity firms. So as Olivia said, these are people with private interests in for-profit industry, and they are the ones who are directly setting our budget, deciding how much tuition costs, and deciding how much of our endowment is spent on the people at this university. Okay, and then those who are managing UVA's wealth, that would be the University of Virginia Investment Management Company. So they manage the $13 billion endowment. Interestingly, the average compensation for their key employees is over $1 million every year, and that is not including additional millions of dollars in deferred benefits and compensation, on average another $1 million for every employee. And as an affiliated nonprofit, UVMCO is not subject to the same laws as UVA, so there's basically no public oversight and no freedom of information related to them. So the result of that is a lack of transparency and accountability that's very detrimental to the operation of our university. So just for examples, UVMCO spends millions of dollars working with private equity firms around the country and across the world. They have over $3 billion invested in private companies alone. And that means that money that is meant to serve the public is being funneled into private equity with no oversight. So I don't think that's positive for a public institution, but that's what they're doing. So just to break down whose labor is valued at this university, sure, this is not surprising to anyone in this room, but an administrative assistant who performs a wide range of duties and basically keeps an academic department running. Grad workers know, like, our admins literally make everything happen. The going rate for a salary at that point is about $47,000. And then a graduate TA who interacts with tens to hundreds of students and provides critical face-to-face instruction, as we all know, makes only $30,000, which is supposed to be an exciting, huge number to us now. Compare that to Robert Dearden, who is the CEO/CIO of UVMCO, who basically just oversees the management of billions of dollars. He made over $3 million this year and another $2 million in deferred benefits. So over $5 million this year. That means that basically if you're a TA, you would have to work for 100 years to earn what this guy earned in 1 year. I mean, and maybe some people think that's fair based on how much income he generates for the university, but that income is just because there's billions of dollars sitting in private equity. So I don't know if that's fair. So basically, in summary, the problem is that financial power at our university currently lies in the hands of corporate entities and private investors through the Board of Visitors and UVMCO. The budgetary priorities of our university reflect this power dynamic, and the solution is that we need to build collective power in order to redirect UVA's financial resources back to our students and back to our community. And now I'm going to pass it off to Cleo to tell us about the Cut the Checks campaign. Thank you.
Okay, so now I'm going to talk about the solution. I'm Cleo. I'm a fourth year grad worker in the history department here. And I'm going to be talking about Cut the Checks. This is a campaign that was started in December 2022 when, as you've heard, over 100 graduate workers were not paid their monthly stipend. So I'm going to walk through a little timeline of this campaign, which will hopefully give you a sense of the on-the-ground implications of UVA's budget priorities, and also give you a chance to see the fight that we're undertaking to change those on-the-ground conditions. So I'm going to start by just telling you about the fall semester of 2022 from my perspective. So I was one of the graduate workers who didn't get paid in December of 2022, and this missed paycheck came at the end of a particularly difficult semester. I spent the fall studying for my comprehensive exams, which were set to take place in mid-November, as well as working as a teaching assistant for an intro course. Working for this intro course meant that I was the primary contact for 60 students who were mostly in their first semester at UVA. Every week, I spent about 15 to 20 hours, even though I was only getting paid for 10, and this is common for a lot of us. Working with these students, attending lectures, facilitating discussion sections, holding office hours, answering emails, grading, and writing letters of reference. I often found that the job demanded as much emotional labor as it did intellectual labor. I was constantly fielding questions that dealt with all the concerns college students have, and especially first-year college students, in this case in their first semester of college, about how to survive college. So I got questions like when the next paper was due, what was an appropriate topic to write on, and if I could read their thesis statement for the 10th time. But I also got questions about students who are having a difficult time with their roommate, or who were feeling particularly homesick, or who were just going through personal problems, and were wondering how they could possibly keep up with their schoolwork while they were dealing with these other problems. So I was the one that they would come to talk through those issues that ended up being more emotional labor on my part than intellectual. This emotional labor became even more intense after the devastating shooting on November 13th. That week, with very little guidance from the university about how TAs should proceed in the wake of the tragedy, I decided I would hold my regular office hours and discussion sections so that any of my students who were still on campus could come talk about how they were feeling, or simply have the option to come sit in a room with their colleagues or with me. One of my students who chose to come to a discussion section had been on the bus where the shooting took place. They wanted my advice on how they should get through the rest of the semester. They didn't know how they were going to get their assignments done, and they just wanted to go home. It became my job to figure out and explain to this student their options. It was also my job in that moment to provide whatever comfort I could. Obviously, during this week, everybody was under a lot of strain, and I share this extreme example of the work that I did last fall only to illustrate the fact that as TAs, we are the primary contacts for undergraduate students, and they often come to us when they have problems. We're the ones who provide undergraduate students with face-to-face contact. We're not just the ones who grade their work and who they can come to when they don't like their grade. We're also the ones who coax them into sharing their ideas in front of peers each week and encourage them to feel comfortable and confident. We're the ones who they turn to when they need to miss class, and we're the ones who help them catch up when they return. In this way, we provide crucial labor for the university that mostly goes unseen. At the end of this week in November, which was one of the most deeply upsetting of my life, I took my comprehensive exams. I spent the following weeks grading my students' end of semester assignments, 60 book reports, and 60 final projects, and fielding their requests for extensions and additional support given the circumstances. Because so many students needed extensions, my grading for this semester stretched into January 2023. I'm telling you all of this not to suggest that as graduate workers, we are particularly put upon or that our jobs are particularly hard. Many of us actually love working as TAs. I love working as a TA. I'm simply trying to highlight the essential intellectual and care work that we provide for the university, without which, as this quote from another graduate worker nicely spells out, the high quality of education that UVA is known for could not be maintained. We know that the university depends on our work, and yet while UVA occasionally pays graduate workers lip service, we seem to be near the very bottom of their priority list when it comes to financially compensating our labor. Not being paid in December of 2022 after the fall 22 semester really drove this point home. So at the end of this semester, as we've said, over 100 graduate students did not receive their pay. I was one of these students. So despite the work that I had done for the university in the fall, which, like I said, actually ended up stretching into January, I wasn't paid. For me, like many others, this was a really big deal because without my monthly pay, I didn't have any extra money to pay bills or cover holiday expenses. My partner, who I live with, paid our rent that month. And I just want to point out that this situation has never been reversed. He has never not been paid by the restaurant that he works for. And even if that did happen, he actually makes about $20,000 more than I do. So he has a little bit saved up. So if that were ever to happen, which again, it has not, he would have a little extra to cover. So the situation has never been reversed, but I have now on 2 occasions had to ask him to pay my share of the rent because of not being paid. So I feel lucky to have this form of financial stability in the form of my partner. And even the months when my pay does come on time, I realize that having a partner I live with significantly offsets the burden of paying rent in Charlottesville on the $30,000 that I now make a year. But others don't have the kind of stability or safety net. And having a partner with a full-time job that will pay half your rent should not be a prerequisite for going to grad school. As my coworker Carrington O'Brien has pointed out, the humanities remain accessible primarily to those with financial stability and family support. When our paychecks aren't reliable, the university is sending a message to those with less privilege. You don't belong. And it should go without saying that when we lose those voices, our research suffers. So on December 28th in 2022, in response to this latest round of missed payments, and I say latest round because missed payments had been somewhat common, at least in the history department, and we know in other departments too before this point. So this was just the latest round of missed payments for us. And in response to this, graduate workers, actually, UVA employees, graduate workers, undergraduates, alumni, and others took to social media calling on the university to pay graduate workers immediately. So here are some tweets that are examples of people calling on the university. On the morning of December 30th, grad workers received an email from administrators which apologized for the late payments and said we could expect them by January 3rd. We were happy that our collective action had forced such a quick response, but while some of us were paid before January 3rd in time to make rent, others didn't receive payments until much later in January. On January 3rd, a delegation of graduate workers met with Provost Balcom and Vice Provost Phil Trella and Bree Gertler. The delegation began by sharing stories of being chronically underpaid by the university, of leaving health problems untreated, not being able to keep cars running, and using community resources to fill the pay gaps left by the university. The delegation then presented 3 demands. 1, immediate payment of all missing stipends. 2, a one-step simple access fund to cover any late fees. And 3, concrete steps to ensure that this chronic problem never happens again. In response, Provost Balcom committed to making all late payments and making graduate workers whole from fines and penalties, but he did not commit to either a timeline or to a simple process for doing so. At this time, a graduate stipend task force was set up to investigate the ongoing problem with grad worker pay, and Balcom committed to resolving these problems before the next round of stipends were set up in the summer. On April 7th, after not hearing anything from the task force for a couple months and having seen no meaningful change regarding late paychecks, 70 plus UVA graduate workers marched up the lawn to deliver a letter to Provost Balcom calling for the reallocation of resources to address the problem of graduate worker missed payments. I was on this delegation, and while Provost Balcom was kind enough to us, he committed to nothing other than continued investigation of the issue. So it was sort of an ongoing theme of rhetoric over resources. On May 4th, the Graduate Stipend Task Force finally released their final report. While the Cut the Checks campaign had repeatedly made clear that adequate staffing, which means not just having enough staff, but also paying them a living wage, is key to solving the problem of graduate worker late payments, the task force only acknowledged that staffing may contribute to the issue of timely processing of payments, and they did not recommend that high staff turnover in our department merited immediate action. In addition, the report failed to acknowledge that the problem of grad worker wage insecurity is part of a larger structural issue. And as you can see excerpted here, the university campus workers issued a response to the task force, which emphasized these points. Okay, so now we're sort of in the current moment. After months of not hearing anything from the task force, and not hearing about any changes that the final report recommended having been implemented, November ended up being a busy month. On November 21st, the Cut the Checks team began publicly sharing stories from grad workers who have experienced missing or delayed payments. Then on December 27th, Dean China Schurz emailed Olivia, whose story was posted first, outlining for the first time a process to follow for workers who don't get paid. Also on November 27th, I was not paid my monthly stipend. So I was short $2,400, and again in a position where I was having to turn to my partner to ask for my share of the rent to be paid. Luckily, because I know Olivia personally and happened to know that she was working on this issue, I was able to text her and then get the information she had received from Dean Schurz about who to contact when these kind of problems crop up. So I immediately emailed the appropriate people, and I heard back that the problem would be looked into. 2 days later, after still not hearing anything, I had to email again. And at that time, I was told for the second time that the problem would be investigated. Then, in the meantime, on November 30th, we received an update from the task force, the stipend task force, about implementations based on the recommendations. The recommendations are implemented over a month late in many cases and incompletely. And the long-term recommendations include a lot more considering and examining than concrete goals. For example, staffing levels, which again, we repeatedly identified as a central issue, are set to be examined in spring of 2024. Further, without the pressure that our collective action surrounding this budget town hall was building, we don't know if we would have received an update at all. Then on December 1st, in the afternoon, I finally received my pay. But at this point, my partner had already paid my share of the rent. So it was a little too late. And then yesterday, on December 5th, Dean Schurz sent out an update to the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences about grad stipends, which says, quote, the university is, quote, unaware of any systemic payment issues. So that brings us to today. And in light of the conclusion that Dean Schurz has arrived at about there being no systemic issues here to talk about, I'd like to close by reading a statement that former PhD student from UVA, Crystal Luo, gave as a member of the first delegation that met with Provost Baucom at the beginning of this year in January of 2023. She said, I started my own PhD program back in the fall of 2017 in the history department here. And since then, just in my own department, I've encountered 2 to 3 incidents every year where someone isn't paid on time. It happened to me my first semester working as a teaching assistant, and now I'm watching it happen to my coworkers in my last semester at UVA. I've watched friends of mine wonder how they're going to make rent, pay bills, or buy food. Because this is a recurring issue, it demands systemic change. And because the underlying issue is the fact that grad student workers at UVA are not paid enough to live securely, any solution to this particular incident must also deal with the fact that grad workers live in a general state of financial insecurity because of how little we are paid by the University of Virginia. And with that, we'll move on to questions and answers.
Hi everyone, my name is Ethan. I'm a graduate worker in the English department. We'll have a short 10-minute Q&A session. So if you're on Zoom and you have questions, if you could please direct those to the chat. And if you're in person, if you could please raise your hand. Yes, Danny. You can if you'd like.
Do we know like why the problem seems with the late payment seems to be like concentrated in certain departments more so than others, and maybe more broadly, like has the university given us any kind of information about what their process is for handling grad worker payments, and like has that given us any indication of where the problem is?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the question was about if we know why late payments seem to be concentrated in like certain departments versus others, and why they keep happening. Is that right? Like, yeah.
Like broadly, like is there? I mean, obviously the issue of like not getting paid enough. Maybe a separate issue from the
lateness. Yeah. So when the universities did the task force report, they identified some like in the kind of standard fellowship disbursement system, like stipend disbursement system, some bottlenecks and some like issues with the way that payment gets processed. I think that another reason this keeps happening is because, and we think this, we've experienced this in the history department so much, we have really high staff turnover rates in our department. People are really underpaid. People are doing two like FTEs, so like full-time employees number of work. So when people leave those jobs to take like new jobs elsewhere in the university or outside of it, the person who's coming in has a huge knowledge curve, also because a lot of us are getting paid through different pots of money in the university. And so like I, for example, got paid, well, I got charged $4,000 at the beginning of this semester that in fact the university was supposed to pay me, because the person who was, as I understand it, the person who was, and again, like none of this is like really clear. This is all like what we understand, gone through like several layers of like communication, because the university has not laid this out in any clear way. But from what I understand, what happened was the person who was initially supposed to deal with those payments got a new job. That was not filled. Somebody else was dealing with it. Wires got crossed. They didn't realize they were supposed to pay us a lump sum at the beginning of the semester. They paid us part of it. They then accidentally unpaid us $4,000 of it, and then they paid us it all again somehow. Which is to say, it's all very confusing. As many grad workers in this room know, you are all getting money from like random pots. There's like not really an accounting of where it all comes from. And then there's somebody like in the administrative staff or SFS who has to like push buttons to make sure that this all adds up to what you're supposed to receive. The fundamental problem there, of course, is that we're not like understood as workers, we're understood as students. And so when you're miscategorized in that way, there's not a penalty for the university for paying you late. They're just like, oh, sorry, our fault. I don't know if you want to add to that, Clea.
I can just add I think the high staff turnover part is a huge piece of it. And I was really lucky on this occasion that Olivia had just heard from Dean Schurz. But otherwise, I think it would have taken a lot longer for me to get paid, because I would have been bouncing around between different people who didn't have an answer for me. And as Olivia said, we've had new people in the department, at least in our admin staff, every year since I've arrived at the university. Yeah, that's right. So 4 years in a row. And so I think there's just a lot of miscommunication, at least in our department, because of these like high staff turnover rates. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Hello, I'm Lucas. I'm going to speak in a second, but I think another idea that I've been thinking about too is thinking about higher like enrollment rates. Means that you need more people to teach those classes, or you need to make those classes larger, which I think fundamentally means that you need more graduate students to teach those classes. So as the university switches to a model where, since it doesn't get more money from the state and it's growing these capital projects, it needs more money and enrolls more people. And maybe that's a maybe not fully accurate way of thinking about it, but it's part of how it functions. As that occurs, you have more students and you need more graduate students to teach. So for instance, in my department, in Danny's department, we we switched to a new system where now first years begin teaching in their second semester, which they did not used to do. And that is part of the new funding package, which was supposed to be more money, but that more money equivalates to us teaching more. So what I think happens is you have a system which isn't really necessarily maybe built around holding all of us. And it becomes antiquated faster as the university moves forward, like expanding for profits and not necessarily trying to check in with itself around how it's actually doing with the people it's serving and with the thing that it's trying to provide. So I think that's also kind of part of it too. I'll stay up here.
Yes.
This might. Hi everyone. This is related as well with like student finances as well, not necessarily with the issue of payments. That's what's an international student, and one of the big issues I had was like the issue of taxation, as well on filing taxes. And just looking back now, I figured out that 2 other international students in my cohort had similar issue. And we have to like, the way it's worked out, you have to work with SFS representative at the ISO's office. But the way that's like configured makes it like almost undoable in the time frame you have to like file taxes. And I remember one of the students in my cohort actually was only in the federal government apparently and had a hard time figuring that out. So that's also a concern I feel other students have and should be part of this move towards financial capability.
Yeah. I'll kind of just want to add on to that. I'm an international student as well. I think several of us in here are. Oh yeah, sorry. This is more just a comment to add on to what you were saying. But the other thing that I think is an issue with international students, which often doesn't get talked about, is that we can't have part-time jobs on the side. So a lot of graduate students take on extra work in order to make pay bills, and we can't do that extra work. So on top of the confusing tax situation, which I still have not figured out, and I've been an international student in the US for like 8 years now, and I can't figure it out. We also can't take on extra work to make ends meet. So I just wanted to add that to your good point. I don't know if anybody has a solution. Answer to that. Yeah.
Like, technically, none of us really can.
Yeah.
Or you have to just like not tell anyone.
Yeah.
Because if you work more than 20 hours a week, you're ineligible for your TA shift.
Right.
And if you work a certain amount of hours in the semester, you're also ineligible for your TA shift. So you're actually restricted in how much side hustle, unless you just don't, which is not good.
Yeah. Can anybody speak to the tax issue? It's just so confusing. Yeah.
So I'm also an international student. I'm a 6th year at UVA, and I do know that UVA is like scared to death to give us any tax advice because they don't want to be liable for any mistakes, right? So we're basically kind of left to our own devices. And yeah, it's not really set up in a way to help us. And we're kind of expected to just figure it out. I know there's like one guy at ISO you can send questions to, but yeah, like you said, it's it's really like he'll take like weeks to respond because obviously during tax season he gets a lot of questions. And then they also like they're not going to help you with forms or anything because they don't want to be liable. When I'm like you have teams of lawyers and so much money, you could figure out a way to give us tax advice where you're also protecting yourself if you really want to do that. But they're just not really interested in doing that. They're not really interested in spending any more resources on us to help us out. So I think that's where it's coming from. And
I'll just add to this in the sense that I think this is when we're told that like the issue of grad worker payments isn't like a systemic issue, this is where like that logic really begins to fall apart, because it is like holistically we aren't being taken care of as people who receive like paychecks from the university, whether it's tax advice, whether it's accountability when we don't get paid on time. And so when we're told that there isn't a systemic issue or they aren't aware, and they're kind of like turning, like, I don't know the expression in English, but you're looking the other way, like batting an eye or turning a blind eye. When that happens, like really they are ignoring the fact that this is occurring like to all of us in some way all the time. And it's a product of a system that it really isn't been built to hold us in this way, and isn't built to hold the contradiction of student and worker, or even just worker who like makes a living here and like really lives well here at all levels, at all places in the university. So this is why part of the Cut the Checks campaign, one of the things that has been really important for us is for advocating for more people to be hired in financial services, as a start, at least, to making it so that they can support us and they can actually do the work that they need to do to be able to have these grad workers who can then get paid, or have anybody who here can get paid on time to make this university run. So I think that's a really important thing to also highlight here, is how that relates to the system.
I wanted to know if you kind of looked into or started to look into the recent change of like what we use now to like do all of stuff. Workday, or there's recent changes in that like really prohibit like admins in our departments on what they can do and how they can help us. So like for instance, like I was up there. Part of the issue was that like my admin couldn't take care of that anymore, and it's really unclear how or who could do it, and the system like apparently has a mind of its own and they can't do stuff. So I don't know if anyone's like looking into that recent issue, but I think admins, administrators will also they have issues with that. I mean, they really, it prohibits them from doing their job.
And so this is a question about, for the Zoom, the ability of administrators to make changes in Workday and to support graduate workers.
Just riff. I mean, just quickly, like I think that the issue with the way that things are set up, like I'm not super aware of like recent changes in Workday or the issues, the specific issues that that's caused, but I have noticed that in general, the like way that payments are put into those portals and who can see that information and who is tracking that information is not consistent, and it's not well done. So I personally had an issue where my whole first year of grad school, I was being taxed incorrectly. So the university owed me like $1,400 or something by the end of the year, which is a lot when like, you know, my paychecks were like $800 or something and they should have been like 9 something, whatever. That's groceries, you know. And that was like the information was in Workday, right? But no one could see that and no one was checking that. So there's a breakdown, you know, I'm not sure what they've changed recently and whether it's made it worse or like better in any way for anyone, but fundamentally, like there's no consistency in how that information is tracked, and there's no one keeping track of like whether your paychecks look correct. You're the only one that has the ability to check that, and then you have to agitate the administrators, and it took 4 months for me to get money back, so it takes a long time. So yeah, the Workday thing, yeah, I think they need a better coherent system for issuing paychecks, and people need to have the correct permission so they can track that you're being paid correctly.
I was really quickly too on the Workday thing. People who have had other jobs in other like places know this, but Workday is set up for individual workplaces, and I believe that our Workday is set up by consultants, and like not actually by people who like work at the university, which would make sense about like why some of these breakdowns are happening, because it's not like they definitely don't ask us how Workday is working for us. Yeah.
To that point, when I was in the field, I went months without getting my receipts reimbursed because of that reason, because my money was through research grants. I went to the university, and then I could reimbursed for expenses that I paid in the field from those research funds. Because of set by consultants, the logics of how research funds and grants was a foreign concept to a lot of those consultants. And so, our administrator could not do it themselves. And it was kind of these back and forth communication systems where she would have to ask the people at that's a lot to do a thing, but they don't understand what that means. And so, yes, I went like 2 months without getting any of my receipts reimbursed.
Jeez.
That I had to just kind of work over out of my savings.
Yeah, so for the Zoom, the receipt reimbursement was also set up for grants and fellowships by consultants who don't really understand academic grants and fellowships, it sounds like. And so it took 2 months to get, what was your name?
Zach.
Zach's research receipts reimbursed, which is bad.
Well, we should move on from Q&A, but if you have other questions, feel free to ask someone who is in the union after this meeting. There will also be additional meetings where you can learn more about the union, and Lucas will tell you more. Yeah.
Oh. All right. Hello, everybody. I spoke already, but just to reintroduce myself, my name is Lucas Martinez. I'm a graduate student and graduate worker in the English department. I teach classes in the creative writing program and in the writing and rhetoric program here at UVA. I will be your final speaker this afternoon. And I want to start by acknowledging that we've covered a lot of information in this town hall. This afternoon, we've seen how UVA is structured to funnel the money that it has into the hands of a few administrators, political and corporate elites. This is at the expense of most people affiliated to university, whether or not you work at UVA, study there, or live in Charlottesville even. This leads to a situation where workers don't get paid on time and are failed by official channels and university bureaucracy when they seek help. Right now, UVA is getting away with running an institution which is not responsible to its workers, to its community, and to its students. In many ways, this information is really distressing. It sucks to think that I spend a good chunk we spend a good chunk of our waking hours at an institution that no matter how much we like the people we work with or the work that we do, it's all controlled by corporate interests who clearly are not worried in the slightest by having a workplace that we need to be able to live and a workplace that we deserve. I also want to acknowledge that none of this is breaking news. Like, we didn't stumble onto some private pot of data that we didn't know about. Many of us, I would venture to say that many of us knew a lot of this information, if at least vaguely in some way, and have been touched by this in another way, on personal levels. All of us in this room, many of us on the Zoom, anyone who showed up tonight. This is all because the university is mismanaged. And when the university is mismanaged towards the road of privatization, it can only ever serve a few people at the expense of the many. And all of us here are the many. We're the many who make UVA a place where people study, teach, research, and live. We're the many who are failed by the university bureaucracy, the many who are told that there isn't enough money to pay us living wages, the many who have to choose between going to a doctor and being able to get groceries, the many who have not been able to count on UVA to pay us on time. We are the people who make UVA work, and we have to decide what we want our workplace to be, to stand for, and how much exploitation we're willing to accept. What I'm here to offer is the chance to continue to take action like you have done tonight. This university is screwing all of us, and we have to continue to say enough is enough. You and I, we have to choose a university that prioritizes its conditions for workers and students that allow teaching, research, education, and life to flourish there. This looks like paying its workers enough to live. It looks like paying workers on time. And it looks like the university being a good citizen of Charlottesville. It looks like prioritizing people over buildings, making decisions democratically rather than in boardrooms. The institution will never change, though, unless we tell it to be accountable to us. And the best way to make it accountable is to choose each other and to organize around the power that we build together. So how do we choose this? How do we choose this other vision than the one that we're handed? And it looks like a lot of different things. It looks like making a stink when you don't get paid on time. It looks like coming to a budget town hall. It looks like checking in with your colleagues and asking them if they like working at UVA, learning their names if you don't know their names in the buildings that you work in. It looks like this afternoon, though, it looks like a few other things. It looks like signing a letter. It looks like talking to somebody if you're not in the union. And if you're in the union and you don't know how to get involved, then it looks like going to an interest meeting tomorrow. So here we go. Also, oh, and this is a new thing that I wasn't prepared for, but we printed out things to make this even easier. So you all there should be a piece of paper on your chair. I had to improvise here. In the chat, we will send things into the chat links, but there's a QR code up here and information for those who are over the Zoom. But I'm going to explain what these things are. So there's a letter to be signed where you can tell UVA you stand with those of us who are seeking to be paid on time. In that letter, you will read more about our efforts to advocate for graduate workers who are still being paid late and for solutions to a systematic problem around payments. We know that for this campaign to win, staff and student financial services and in our home departments also need a win. When those staff win and are able to lift more of the day-to-day administrative burden, our professors who otherwise take on that burden also win. And when our professors also win, more time for teaching and research, undergraduate students win, and so on and so forth. Signing this letter will be a way to contribute to this win to make our university work for all of us. Furthermore, tomorrow there is a union interest meeting you can sign up for. For those of you who are in the union and don't know how to get involved, this is a great place to start. And finally, for those of you who are not a part of the union and are curious or feel ready to join, there are QR codes and people with computers around the room ready to help you sign up. You have Justin over there, and I'll be back there soon. Many of the union members here tonight are in red, but also at this point, you've seen us and you can come talk to us. We are excited and interested in talking to you about what you're passionate about and helping you plug in to finding a better vision for your workplace. So with that, I would like to conclude this budget town hall, invite you all to hang out and chat if you have more questions and comments. We're very excited to have had you here tonight, and we hope that you all make it home safe.
Yeah, music on. Oh, right.